Let's now catch up with the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, also in charge of government cost cutting, Jacinta Nampijinpa Price, joining us live from Darwin. Thanks for joining us, Jacinta.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Hello, everyone.
Big announcement today from the Coalition. I think a welcome announcement. Even Joel Fitzgibbon says it's welcome in terms of its general aim, $21 billion extra for defence over the next 5 years. Where's the money going to come from?
Well, as I've been tasked with the job of government efficiency going forward, obviously, we need to be able to win government so we can have a look at the books and understand across all portfolios where we know that there's a lot of government waste and where we can redirect those funds to things like our national defence, which is in a terrible situation and has been weak under Albanese. Which is why we've seen, Chinese government warships circumnavigating our country, and more should have been done in order to bolster defence in our country. So I'm very pleased that we are going to invest in our nation's defence and increase spending and put our spend to 2.5% of GDP in terms of our defence, which is really quite necessary in these really uncertain times.
Yeah, it should be there all the time. Never should have sunk so low. But look, there's no doubt that there's tens of billions of dollars of government spending and wastage that is there to be found. But has our politics become so reactive now that you can't even identify any of that in the lead up to an election because you get screaming from the government about it? Or is it a matter of you have to wait till you get into government to find where all the waste is?
Yeah, look, I mean, there is a lot of work to be done. And like I said, I think we need to be able to see what's going on within the Treasury to understand the lay of the land, to be able to know where we can, divert funds to be able to do things like bolster our defence in our country. That is just the fact of the situation. On the other hand, then you've also got the Prime Minister who has failed in many ways. He's wasted a lot of Australians' taxpayers' dollars, who will try to make out as though we're going to cut from the front line, which is simply not true. But we've seen how this Prime Minister can't lie straight in bed at night and falsify the circumstances. I mean, they're able to find money willy-nilly and throw it around all over the place and not come up with the numbers when it comes to their push for renewables and then make up lies about $600 billion. But no, we want to be responsible. And that's what I think the Coalition has always been about, responsibly handling the books on behalf of taxpayers in our country and knowing where we can redirect taxpayers' funds to support our country in practical ways, in ways that we know is going to provide outcomes, is going to make our country safer at the same time.
I want to ask you about political preferences and preference deals. We know the Labor are preferencing the Greens just about everywhere, even the Prime Minister preferencing a radical Green in his own seat. Yet there's been these arrangements from One Nation today where they're going to preference the Coalition. That's going to be good for the Coalition. Labor are always trying to equate that. The Coalition gets preferences from the One Nation. That's no worse than getting preferences from the Greens. But is there any difference? Do you have any serious problems with One Nation policies? It caused a lot of issues in Indigenous relations back in the day. Do you have any problems with Pauline Hanson on those issues now?
Oh, look, let's face it. I mean, the Greens are absolute radicals. The One Nation aren't radical like the Greens. I mean, the anti-Semitism that we have seen increase in our country and the division that we've seen increase in our country is ridiculous. One Nation supports efforts like what we want to do in the Indigenous space, which is to audit the billions of dollars that has been spent year in, year out, which is to hold a Royal Commission into sexual abuse in Indigenous communities. And these are very important issues that the Prime Minister has failed on all accounts across the area of Indigenous affairs, has no plan for, would ignore the voices of vulnerable victims in remote communities, along with the Greens. The Greens are a very dangerous party who are anti-Australian. Let's face it, One Nation is not anti-Australian. So the Prime Minister to compare the Greens to One Nation is utterly ridiculous. And as I've said, they've supported motions like holding a royal commission to sexual abuse in Indigenous communities and other measures. So no, there is no comparison at all when it comes to them.
Let me then go to Indigenous issues and the Greens. I was sort of replay an excerpt from the candidate Hannah Thomas, who's running in the seat of Grayndler against the Prime Minister. The candidate the Prime Minister is preferencing. And note at the start of this clip what she says about Indigenous issues.
My name is Hannah Thomas and I'm your Greens candidate for Grayndler. We'll fight for truth, treaty and justice with First Nations people, an end to the cruel treatment of refugees and take a strong stand against Israel's genocide in Gaza.
Yeah, now you of course opposed The Voice, Jacinta. You and I argued about that publicly and privately. But does that suggest, of course, the Greens still have an agenda there when it comes to treaty and truth, and is that something that they might negotiate with Labor if they have to form minority government?
Absolutely. I mean, the Greens are completely out of touch when it comes to Indigenous issues. It's the reason why Lydia Thorpe left the Greens, because she understood the fact that they weren't interested in listening to Indigenous voices. They have their own agenda. I mean, it's quite infantilising the Greens that we have in the Territory, who talk a big talk about treaty and culture and all those things, but they're behind outfits like the Environmental Defenders Office, who exploit Aboriginal people and make up fake Indigenous dreaming stories for their own agendas to block projects. This is what the Greens are all about, thinking that they know what's best for Aboriginal people when they're completely out of touch. I mean, it was a former Green staffer who now works for Our Watch, who tells journalists how to report on domestic violence and Indigenous affairs and tries to gaslight us to suggest that, violence is not part of traditional culture when we've got traditional cultural payback going on in places like the Northern Territory. And when those of us who've had the lived experience know that violence is accepted in traditional culture. So the Greens are dangerous. They're interested in their agenda, which is a radical agenda. They're not interested in supporting Indigenous Australians to become, get off welfare dependency and economically independent and stand on their own 2 feet. They want to use Aboriginal people for their own vote to maintain power. Again, look at Lydia Thorpe. She left the Greens because she discovered what they're actually really like.
Jacinta, great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.